Hello, and thanks for joining us. I'm Glenn Andrews, and I'm here to present the 34th Annual Retailer Survey. With me in the studio is Chiarello-Ebner, the editor and associate publisher of Whole Foods magazine. And on the phone is Jay Jacobowitz, president and founder of Retail Insights, a consulting and marketing services firm serving the natural products industry. Jay is also the merchandising editor of Whole Foods magazine. Thank you for joining me today, Kaylin.
Thanks for having us.
And thank you for joining us on the phone, Jay.
My pleasure.
So, Kaylin, to jump right in, how does Whole Foods collect its data?
Well, for the past 34 years, Whole Foods magazine has surveyed our readership, mainly natural products retailers, about their annual sales data. For last year's survey, 2011, we faxed and we emailed our questionnaire during August, and we asked everybody to give us a sense of their September 1st, 2010 through August 31st, 2011 sales data. Respondents were from all over the country, mainly from the West, 28%. Though just over a quarter of the stores had some kind of online sales, only about 2% of the overall sales actually came from the internet. So our survey base was heavily brick-and-mortar stores located everywhere from large towns to major metropolitan areas. And that's actually a really important characteristic of our survey base, along with a couple other things. First, this year's stores were smaller on average compared with the stores that responded in past years. They had gross lease areas, or GLAs, of about 2,900 square feet, which was about 15% smaller than we saw last year. This year, average retail areas were also smaller, 2,267 square feet. So we're not talking about huge 30,000 square foot supermarkets. This brings me to my second point. On average, 54% of their sales came from dietary supplements, and just about 32% from grocery items. This is really important to keep in mind as we consider their overall sales and net profit. They also had average turns per year of 5.9, and that's really indicative of the supplement-heavy, smaller retailer. Would you agree with that, Jay?
The 5.9 turns this year, Retail Insights has been tracking inventory turns in the industry for over a decade, and we've seen consistently inventory turns slow down. That means retailers are keeping more inventory on their shelves and less in their bank accounts as the inventory turns slower. It's pretty apparent why this is, and that is because of the explosion of new products that are line extensions and not necessarily truly innovative products. Prior to this explosion, it was harder to fill the shelves with relevant products, but today retailers really have to pick and choose, and I would say that the trend is that it's difficult to do that. It's easy to buy something, it's much more difficult to sell it through on the shelf. So I'd really like to see the industry move from about 6 turns per year to 8 to 10 turns per year, and that would be beneficial on several different levels. First, cash flows would improve, checkbook balances would increase, and the retailers would probably actually make it easier both on the staff and on the customer by actually reducing choices and just winnowing out the lower quality products and offering just the highest quality products. The industry was this way, as I said, 15, 20 years ago. We saw that level of inventory turns, and I think it's a good goal for the industry to shoot for.
So with all this information, I think the question we're all wondering is, how did stores fare in 2011?
Well, let's start with overall sales. Whole Foods can estimate that independent retailers had an average of $1.01 million in sales this year. And if you've been following our sales surveys over the past few years, you know that this has been a small dip from what we saw previously. But remember, we're talking about smaller stores, and we can't forget the economic uncertainty that we faced in the past year and before. So let's juxtapose this number with some other data questions, particularly one that we asked point blank, did your sales increase or decrease, and by how much? Well, a whopping 77% of retailers said their sales were actually up, and that's far more than we've seen in previous years. To give you a sense, in 2010, only 47% said that their sales increased, but the amount by which their sales increased in past years was actually down slightly, about 6.2% overall. At the same time, we had fewer stores with declines, but the amount by which their sales were down was the most we've seen in past years. There's actually some good news when we consider net profit, And by that, we mean cash left over after all expenses were paid but before taxes. This year, average net profits were $88,680, which was a huge spike from 2010 numbers. It's actually 30% higher. That's huge. And it's very encouraging. It says a lot about the health and the success of our smaller retailers. These stores are actually operating in some very efficient spaces. If we look at profits by square foot, this year's average was $30.34 per square foot, which again was way better than we saw last year. That last year it was only $22.68 per square foot. Net profit percentages leapt too. We saw 9% this year and just 6% last year in 2010. Few retail stores could claim that kind of growth in other industries in a down economy.
How did these stores manage to achieve such strong growth?
Well, I think a few factors are at work here, and there's some interplay between them. I really believe that the root of success for retailers is knowing your client and the individual needs of your community, and then having the right product mix to intrigue first-time buyers to come into your store and have customers come back for repeat sales. And last, smart marketing and well-thought-out advertising campaigns helps as well.
You mentioned product mix. What advice can you give a retailer so they can be sure to meet shoppers' needs?
Well, unfortunately, there's really no magic bullet. What I can say is that our data indicate that there's a distinct link between sales and profits and perishable foods. And by perishable foods, we mean to be anything that's refrigerated or frozen, like fresh produce, prepared foods, and things like that. We broke down all of our numbers by perishable sales, and we found that overall sales increased as perishable sales increased. Let's take stores with the most perishables, and by that I mean 40% or more of all their sales came from this category. They had the most foot traffic of all stores when you looked at it, 465 people per day. And the most sales as well, 2.09 million. Now remember what I said before, the average for all stores is only 1.01 million. So these stores had a much higher sales per year than the average respondent. Let's compare that with the smallest perishables bracket, which was 1 to 9%. Their annual sales were just $644,238 and only 63 people per day. Let's throw net profits into the mix. Stores with the most net profit of all were in the 30 to 39% perishables bracket. Now, ready for this? Their profits after expenses were paid were over $311,000 per year, with a net profit percentage of 15%. Again, that's a big number. Now, the average of all respondents was just over $88,000 per year, with a net profit percentage of 8.8%. So you might be wondering, what exactly is the link between perishables and higher sales? Well, again, it has to do with knowing your customers and your individual community. It could be that successful stores are meeting the need of their natural shoppers that want to stock up for a week in terms of groceries. And they also want a store where they can stop in every night as needed for a quick pre-made meal for dinner. Stores with the most net profits were also the ones that sold the most refrigerated items like milk and cheese. Stores with just 1 to 9% of sales from perishable foods relied more heavily on refrigerated items and generated very little from prepared foods. So the lesson is, if you're going to offer perishables, you've got to have a good plan and manage these sections well.
Jay, given your background as a merchandising expert for natural products retailing, how does one best market and manage a perishable section in balance with supplements?
Looking at the data from this year, I hit upon a theory that we're calling the Goldilocks theory. Not too hot, not too cold, but just right. What I mean here is it was clear that stores that had very little perishables and really emphasized supplements, so I'm talking 80 or 90% of sales from supplements, had the least amount of customer transactions per day. On the other end of the spectrum, stores that were heavily into prepared foods departments and lots of perishable foods, they had more customers, but they didn't have as much profit. They weren't as efficient. But somewhere in the middle, stores that had enough perishables to attract a customer that was interested perhaps in putting dinner together that night, but not so much that it overwhelmed the store in terms of its costs or how much room it takes up in the store, seemed to do best. They also had a critical mass worth of supplements. So they didn't ignore supplements, but they had a nice balance. So we call this the Goldilocks theory.
Kaylin, can stores make it if they are heavily supplement sellers?
Absolutely. I mean, First, you've got to keep in mind what Jay was just saying. Stores with a good balance seem to fare the best. For instance, the ones that had 150,000 plus in net profits had 44% of their sales from supplements and 25% from perishable foods. So they had both camps in their store. But we also found a very profitable group that had practically no perishable sales, but had decent net profits, 86,666. These stores typically aren't afraid to be seen as highly knowledgeable about nutrition, and they really pride themselves on customer service. I think this shows us that there's a need for both models. The key is really to convey your store identity strongly to your base. And if you're a small retailer selling mostly supplements, exploit that and exploit your knowledge.
Jay, we've been so far talking about independent stores. How did natural products do overall in all retail outlets?
Natural products throughout the industry is something that Retail Insights looks at very closely. We do so for the benefit of our clients who are interested in either putting a new store in a market or expanding an existing store. So we have to know what the potential of those markets is. As a result of that, we do a very granular analysis of the retail industry. There's actually 8 channels that sell natural products. And in the 34th annual survey of Whole Foods, which is in the December issue, 2011, we publicly published for the first time our analysis of these 8 channels. It's fairly groundbreaking information, and I would encourage people to take some time to look at the table there. But I'll highlight just a few of the interesting items. There are actually over 100,000 stores in the U.S. that sell natural and organic products. The total percentage market share for natural and organic products of the entire food industry, and by that I mean retail food, so we're not talking about restaurants here, but out of food stores such as supermarkets and club stores such as Costco and mass marketers such as Target and Walmart, vitamin chain stores and independents as well, is almost 9%, 8.6% as of 2011. Now, this doesn't sound like much, but it actually winds up being almost $50 billion out of a total of almost $600 billion in total food store sales. This number, the 8.6% market share, has been steadily increasing. The reason for this is that conventional foods, when you take into account the rise in costs for inflation, are actually not growing all that much, in single digits, low single digits at best, and almost flatlining when you take into account inflation. On the other hand, natural and organic products have been growing at a much more rapid pace for many, many years in a row, 8 to 10% per year on average. If you extend these trend lines out for the next generation, it's entirely possible that natural and organic products will make up half of the entire food sales. And I must mention, just coming across the wires today, Hostess Twinkies is going out of business. They're going to be declaring Chapter 11. This is part of a long-term trend towards higher quality foods, and the American consumer is choosing these foods increasingly as people become more aware of how important it is to have quality foods in the diet and the relation between that and good health. One of the other interesting statistics in the table of the 2011 retail universe for premium natural organic food, supplement, and personal care sales that Retail Insights published for the first time in the 34th annual survey here is that overall, out of the 100,000 plus stores, and again, to remind you, we're talking about everything from a 50,000 square foot Whole Foods to an 80,000 square foot Kroger to a 180,000 square foot Walmart to a 4,000 square foot vitamin chain store. Out of all those stores, the average sales for each store of natural and organic products is $453,000. A little less than half of what we saw in the survey here. But that makes sense when you think about that we're actually including all of the pharmacies. There's some 59,000 pharmacies in the country that have 8 or 10 or 12 or even 30 feet of supplements. We count those too. So it's just interesting how well integrated natural and organic products are in our society and in 8 different channels of food retailing.
Kaylin, if I can ask you first, and Jay, I'm going to ask you to chime in on this. How can we help retailers tackle some barriers that are standing in the way of their future success?
Well, we actually asked a similar question on our survey this year. We wanted them to identify their most pressing problems. And we heard a lot of different types of responses, but there were 3 main themes that we saw, and let's talk about them. The first that we saw was competition from Vitamin Shop, Walmart, the internet, some big players. And for the retailer, what we can say is, again, exploit your best asset, which is knowledge. A knowledgeable retailer can point shoppers to the best products to meet their needs, and that's something that you're not going to find on the internet or in a Walmart. Now consider this. Stores with the most customers per day spend slightly more on advertising than other shops. It was about 3% of their annual sales. Now, stores that we're calling extroverted were ones that felt that they were educators and they weren't afraid to host their own radio show or present themselves in a newsletter. These techniques are really bold ways of showing that a store is a nutritional authority. That's important. When stores put about 20% of their marketing budget or more into newsletters, we saw that they also had really strong net profits of $176,000 per year. And they had really high net profit percentages too, 18%. Those that spent at least 20% of their marketing budgets on radio, most likely hosting their own radio show, also had high net profits, $116,000 plus last year. And they also had net profit percentages of 12%. Now, stores that favored more static and less direct means of interacting with clients, like discounting, had far less net profit percentages, only 8%. Jay actually spoke a little about the value of knowledge in his 2011 tip for Whole Foods magazine. Do you want to talk a little about that, Jay?
I'd love to. What we're seeing really, if we think about the broad arc of the growth of the natural products industry over the last 30 or 40 years, in 1980, yogurt was unheard of in the supermarket, but natural product stores had the product. And I think what happened is that natural products retailers, particularly independents, got a sense that they had an exclusive corner on the market for these products. As supermarkets woke up and became smart and began adding these products to their sets, people began splitting their shopping less in specialty stores and combining most of their shopping in one large trip to their conventional supermarket. In order to succeed in this environment, because products are no longer unique, independent natural products retailers do have to be much more dynamic today than they had to be in the past. And this is what we're seeing in the data. Stores that relied, for example, on Yellow Pages advertising had the least customers per day. On the other hand, as Kaylin said, stores who were dynamic and had, for example, their own radio talk show had the most customers per day and the highest profits. So it's no longer possible, in our view, to succeed as a small independent retail store, even if you have more than one store, by just expecting the products themselves to carry the whole business model and make you different than the rest of the world, because the products by themselves are not, in fact, different. One of the other aspects that we saw in the survey was that stores that had a good amount, maybe a few dozen SKUs of that stock keeping units of private label products, also did well, had good profits. To me, that says that the smart independent retailer who realizes that their store is in and of itself a brand in the mind of the shopper, over and above the products that they sell on the shelf, are very, very wise indeed. And I like to give this example. Every retailer in my seminars corroborates this. Shoppers come back in, they say, I need to get another bottle, that little one with a green label, and retailers have to sort of go on a wild goose chase, 20 questions to actually figure out which product the customer bought. Well, this is a very good example that the store itself is what shoppers remember, and less so the brands of the products that they're buying on the shelf. So retailers can actually leverage this psychological fact in the mind of the shopper. The store is important, and therefore the knowledge that the store has and that it imparts to the customer, the care with which they interact with the customer. These things are all very important and what actually makes the most emotional difference in the mind of the shopper. Stores, therefore, to sum up, who are dynamic, who present private label products and act as a high-quality editor of the rest of the products that they carry, who are willing to share their knowledge with their customers, not just on the store floor, but out in the community, for example, with their radio talk show, their own nutritional newsletter, other vehicles such as that, will have the best chance of succeeding as the marketplace heats up and competition increases.
Kaylin, Jay spoke a bit about private label. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, yeah, that actually ties in with the second roadblock that retailers told us about, and that's dealing with light traffic. One great way to ensure repeat sales is with a store brand. Now, this year, like Jay was saying, we found that private labeling offerings, having some sort of private label in your store, whether it's supplements or foods, was correlated with having increased profits and sales. But remember, private labeling only works well when it's marketed well. You can't just put some bottles on a shelf with your logo on it and expect them to fly off your shelves. You have to explain to shoppers why it's a benefit to them. And if they do like it, it's a fair bet that they'll come back to you for more. And the third roadblock that we saw was fear of regulatory threats. Now, it's true that there's been a lot of mounting and scary things coming down the pipe. I mean, let's talk about the new dietary ingredients guideline that was proposed in 2011. We've got the Dietary Supplement Labeling Act. There's some things going on in Codex that people don't like. Really, the best advice that we can give is to be active in your trade associations. These folks are really looking out what's going on every day from a regulatory perspective, and they're the most prepared to act on behalf of the industry in numerous ways, whether it's lobbying, meeting with regulators, petitioning. There's a lot of great things going on there. And it's really easy for retailers to get involved. I mean, the NPA, the Natural Products Association, they just announced that their 2012 Lobby Day is going to be March 27th. And that's a great way for the industry's collective voice to be heard on the Hill. If you want to find out more, their website is npainfo.org. Anything else, Jay?
On the regulatory front, what we've seen over the years is that there's a dedicated core group of retailers who participate actively in their associations, such as the Natural Products Association, and that the vast majority of retailers have the attitude, more or less, I think I can summarize fairly by saying, somebody else will take care of this for me. At the low entry cost per year, I mean, it's less than a cup of coffee a week, you can join the Natural Products Association and participate and advocate for your industry, because really the citizen advocate, the constituent, talking to your congressman and your senator and making your interests known to them is actually how our democracy works best. And NPA, as one of the associations, is very good at helping direct you and sort of make this turnkey so that you don't have to spend a lot of time developing what you're going to say or how you're going to do things. So I recommend everybody joins NPA. As Kaylin said, npainfo.org. It's a nominal fee. Get familiar and get active.
Kaylin, on behalf of Whole Foods Magazine, do you have anything you'd like to say in closing?
Whole Foods Magazine has been publishing its annual survey for 34 years. Thanks to any retailers listening that have participated in the past. We really appreciate your filling out our survey. But if you haven't participated in the past and you'd like to do so, watch for our email and our fax in August 2012. We'd love to get as many people to participate as possible so that we can offer the most accurate look at our industry as we can.
Jay, do you have any final thoughts you have to share with our listeners today?
Well, looking at the 34th annual survey, I was impressed at the strength of the industry, particularly the independents that mostly responded to the survey. The industry overall is, at this point, when you have 8 to 10 or 12% growth, that means that the industry is adding $4 to $6 billion with a B dollars per year. It really is just there for the taking. And those independents who've realized that, you know what, I've got to be a little dynamic here, I've got to change it up, I've got to reach out, I've got to become a known quantity in my community. However you do that, there's many, many different ways, as we've seen, from radio to print advertising to online to in-store. as long as you're willing to be dynamic, some of that fruit, low-hanging fruit, is there for the taking. And I would encourage everybody to think about this.
Well, Jay and Kaylin, thank you very much. I think you've provided a lot of great information and food for thought for the listeners today.
My pleasure.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
For any more information, people can see the December 2011 issue of Whole Foods magazine.